The Space Marines may be the poster boys of the Warhammer 40k universe, but it is the lowly Chapter Serfs and Planetary Defense Forces that shore up these powerful warriors, and in this video we'll be tackling another one of these individuals. But this time we'll be travelling to the homeworld of the Salamanders Chapter to build a member of Nocturne's Auxilia. To give myself the greatest opportunity for conversions, I settled on building a more high-ranking member of Nocturne's Auxilia, something equivalent to a Lord Castellan. As such, I based this build around one of the Auxilia captains from the Solar Auxilia Command Squad kit. My reasoning in choosing this particular kit was due to the extreme environment aspect of the armour. It made sense to me that a force based on an extremely volatile world such as Nocturne would be equipped to handle such extremes. I removed the parts required to build the captain and cleaned them up of any mold lines before assembling the legs and coattails. But when it came to assembling the torso, I instead opted to use one of the less ornate panels from the kit. My intention was to cover this area up later on, so it didn't seem worth wasting a more detailed part. My choice of arms were pretty straightforward, an arm holding a power hammer and a pointing arm. These were simply taken from the Auxilia command sprue and glued to the torso. The hammer also fed into the Salamander's theme, being both Vulcan's weapon of choice and a symbol of Nocturne's artisans. The first real deviation from the instructions came when I sourced a couple of alternative shoulder pads from the Dwarf Iron breakers. In general, Dwarven parts mesh incredibly well with the Salamanders. Both enjoy hammers, ornate detailing, and, in regards to the semi-nude variety, fire and scaly beasts. In order to attach these new shoulder pads, I did need to clip away the torso mounted light, but once it was removed, the shoulder pads were glued quite easily and blended surprisingly well into the rest of the armour. When selecting a head, the original head from the Solar Auxilia kit would have worked really well, but I specifically wanted a helmetless one for this particular build. Fortunately, the heads from the multitude of Cadian kits work straight out of the box with the Solar Auxilia torsos. With the bulk of the model in place, my next task was to start working on a few of the extra details. The first of these were some Salamander-style reptile skins. I began by first mixing up a small batch of green stuff. This was rolled into a sausage shape that had been pinched at each end. I laid this piece across the chest, pressed it down, and smoothed it out across the chest. During this whole process, I made use of a little Vaseline and some silicone-tipped tools. These make working with the sticky green stuff much easier and resulted in some smoother results. Next up were the scales themselves. My approach to this was to roll out some extremely small balls of green stuff, place them across the sash and gently press them flat. This created a single scale. This process was repeated, laying the scales adjacent to each other and in slightly varying sizes. As these steadily built, the effect was that of a scaly surface. While my approach is a little fiddly, I do find the results to be better than when I've attempted to scour these scales onto a surface, and is easily scalable, pun intended, for larger miniatures. Once I'd finished this step, I allowed the green stuff to cure overnight. The final few steps saw me attach a few extra items from several different kits. The first was a hammer and tooth combo taken from the Salamander's upgrade sprue. This was followed up with a regular Solar Auxilia pouch, and then finally a rune taken from the Fyreslayer's range. As I mentioned earlier, the dwarf kits are an excellent source of parts for Salamander builds. Next up was the base. This started out as a cork floor tile that I tore up into a rough, rocky outcrop before supergluing it to the base, followed by my Salamander Auxilia. It was looking pretty basic though, so to firmly place this miniature on the world of Nocturne, I decided to create a few spots of flames. These were created by mixing up a little more green stuff, and while it's still soft, supergluing it to the base. This might seem odd, but the superglue holds the green stuff in place so that when I used my tweezers to pick and pluck the putty, the bottom stays in place and stringy vertical tufts are formed. Some larger and smaller tufts were created to represent tongues of flame, and a smaller patch of fire was added to another part of the base. Once I completed these, the base was left to cure overnight before painting. My first step was to prime the model, and for this I used some of Colourforge's primer. I chose the slightly reddish brown of Hyrax Brown. This model would feature a lot of greens, browns and reds, so it made a lot of sense to me to start off with this particular colour. Also, if you're enjoying this video so far, please do consider dropping me a like and maybe subscribing too. It's really small, but it helps me and the channel out massively. So with that out of the way, let's crack on with the painting. The first area to paint was the fabric undersuit. When painting minis, I generally like to paint things from the inside out, as it just makes it easier to reach those tucked away areas. The Hyrax Brown had already provided a good base colour, but it just needed those recesses darkening down a bit. I achieved this with a wash of Oblivion and Black, which was sourced from the 2 thin coats range. To continue the leather effect of the undersuit, I then painted on a line of the lighter Ancient Forest along the edges of the details. This is known as a highlight and helps to lift those details out. This was then followed by an extreme highlight of the even lighter Wasteland Brown. Extreme highlights work much the same as a regular highlight, but where I tackled the whole edge previously, this time I just added some small spots to the sharpest points and corners. Combined with the previous highlight, this helped to make those details stand out even further. From here, I began to base coat the gloves, boots, pouches and straps with some Death Reaper. For each of my base coats, I mixed in a little water and applied a couple of thinner layers. This just allowed for better coverage, whilst also avoiding layering up the paint too thickly. I then further darkened down the recesses of the already dark grey with some Oblivion Black wash. These areas were then highlighted with Dungeonstone Grey, with my final step being an extreme highlight of Wizard Grey. To create the iconic green colour of the Salamanders, I started out with a base coat of Emerald Green and used this to paint all of the armour plates. To wash the armour, I settled on some Hellion Red. This might seem like an odd choice, but red contrasts really nicely against the green of the armour and would help that green to stand out nicely against the darker red recesses. I then highlighted the armour with Ethereal Green, and followed this up with a few bright spots of Talisman Green. I then turned my attention to the metallics, the first of these being all of the detailing and decoration found across the model. For these areas, I applied a base coat of Battle Axe Brass, paying close attention not to overspill onto the already completed areas. A wash of Battle Mud was then applied across these, before breaking out the Battle Axe Brass again to apply as a subtle highlight. The next metallic area to take on were the copper details, such as the various pipes dotted across the model. Unsurprisingly, I used some Steampunk Copper here. They were then washed with Battle Mud, with the highlights seeing me use yet more Battle Axe Brass. The final metallic area left for me to tackle were the remaining silver areas, and these were painted with Dwarven Iron, washed with Oblivion Black, and finally highlighted with some Mythril Blade. With the final metallic step completed, I changed out my paint water to avoid any cross-contamination of the metal flakes into my other paints. My next areas of focus were the red details. These included the leather wrapping around the hammer's handle, the rope at the waist, and the reptile skin across the chest. These were all first base coated with Berserker Red. From here, I gave the surfaces another wash of Hellion Red. Before starting on the highlights, I first began with some Sanguine Scarlet, and finally some small spots of Demon Red. For the skin, I wanted to recreate the iconic ebony shade of Nocturne's inhabitants. The base coat that I selected for this was Ashen Grey. I skipped the wash entirely and went straight to the highlights, starting with Eidolon Grey, and finally some Rodent Grey. To recreate the red eyes, some small dots of Demon Red were then added. You may notice that I've also painted the hair here, and this was done in the exact same way as the gloves and boots. And with that, the model itself was completed, which meant I could start work on the base. To give the appearance of a volcanic rock, I applied a base coat of Death Reaper, darkened down the recesses with a little Oblivion Black wash, before lifting out the texture in the rocks with some Cold Corpse Blue, which I followed up with some Wolf Grey. The bluish greys that I'd used here would help to differentiate them against the boots, whilst also creating a cooler contrast against the fire that I'll be tackling next. To create that burning flame effect, my first step was to base coat both the flames and the rocks immediately facing the flames using some Trooper White. This created a great surface in which to apply some yellow glaze to. As I applied the glaze, it helped to create a bright yellow colour across the flames and the rocks around them, giving them a more realistic, glowing appearance. To finish off the flames, the tips of the flames were then picked out with some orange glaze, which completed them. So, all I had left to do now was to clean up the rim of the base with some Doom Death Black, and seal everything in with a coat of matte varnish, which left me with this. And here we have the completed Lord Castellan of the Nocturne Auxilia. My biggest aim with this build was to replicate the style and theming of the Salamanders chapter, but on a smaller, more human scale. And I think I've achieved that. Even without the obvious paint scheme, I think there are enough details in here that hint at their affiliation. This theme would be fairly straightforward to apply across a larger force too. Your HQ units and squad leaders could be embellished with the sculpted scales and dwarven parts, where your regular rank and file could just be painted in the same green, gold and red scheme that I've employed here. Now, if you haven't done so already, then make sure to check out my previous Ultramar Auxilia, which I'll have pinned at the top of the screen, along with some links below, and let me know which chapter serfs I should tackle next. You'll also find some affiliate links to all the kits, tools and paints that I used to make this model below, and if you do give this model or scheme a go, then please do drop me a tag if you share it on social media. Now, before I go, I just want to say a big thank you to my Patreon supporters and channel members, the people who are responsible for keeping these videos coming, especially my Pouch of Dead Animal Bits tier and above supporters, who are Andrew Console, Axel Jonsson, Bartosz Sikowski, Berserker, Daniel Dowling, Hugh Wright, Ian, Immaterial Creations, Yazuya, Maciej Savitsky, Matt Brower, Molly Mock, Morgan, Mr. Grimm, Pale Juice, Plumps of Corn, Ryan Little, Splinkus, Swedsman, Tim, and Tom Haysmith. And my Sergeant level channel members, who are Nightlord Tim, Lloyd Davies, Dea, Trooper Geo, Mr. Jared Hess 95, David, John Gibbs, The Sire Acquired, Philip Poyer, Nerdington Paints, Mark Taylor, and Whale Tussler. So, until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.